All right, guys, I think then we can start. And if someone will join, they can for sure attend this webinar. Let me first of all say hello to you, every one of you, and introduce Dr. Chase. We're honored to have him today's webinar. He's a director of Hogan Research Institute, and today he will be sharing his expertise on ethical decision making, and he give us some practical tips on how to spot ethical risks early and make more smarter, more informed decisions. Dr. Chase, we are so glad to have you again, and over to you.
Great, happy to be here. Let me just get my slide shared real quick.
Sure.
Okay, can you all see my slides?
We can.
Okay, great. So
yes,
hi everyone.
Slides.
Excellent.
Hello.
So thank you for having me. I'm Chase Winterberg. I am a business psychologist and American lawyer who helps organizations optimize human behavior within their companies. And today's talk is called Doing the Right Thing, How Great Leaders Make Better Decisions. And before we start, a quick promise, this is not going to be a lecture about bad people doing bad things. Most ethical failures begin as ordinary decisions made under pressure in a gray area by smart and capable people. So here are two norms for today. First, we will treat examples as learning tools, not as a way to judge anyone's character. So let's treat everyone respectfully. Second, if you share a personal example, keep it general enough that you are not naming people or organizations. Sometimes when we're talking about ethical stuff, some sensitive information can come up pretty easily. So let me open with a quick question. Raise your hand or click the reaction button in Teams if you have ever watched something at work that felt a little off. Not obviously illegal, not a dramatic crime, just a small compromise, a shortcut, a rationalization, a we will fix this later situation. All right, seeing a lot of reactions, a lot of hands being raised. So it's important to keep in mind that this is the world that leaders actually operate in. And here's why this matters. It shapes performance, trust, culture, risk exposure, and leadership credibility. Across roles and industries, ethical behavior is a core performance expectation. So in a large study that I conducted, ethical behavior showed up as the most important performance dimension out of 62 total dimensions across the global workforce. And it clusters with other do the right thing behaviors like accountability. So in other words, ethics is not an add-on or extra expectation. In many jobs, it is part of what performance actually means. And in organizational settings, ethical behavior is also associated with outcomes leaders care about, including better performance and retention, reduced misconduct contagion. So, misconduct can spread. You see other people doing it, then you'll feel like you can do it as well. And it leads to stronger brand loyalty. However, its rare story is not great comfort here. Survey findings often show a meaningful share of employees report observing misconduct, and a large portion is attributed to management. So the question is not, will I ever face an ethical risk? The question is, when you face it, how early will you recognize it, and how deliberately will you respond? So one more reality check. Let me know if you think you are more ethical than the average person. So raise your hand, give me a reaction if you're more ethical than the average person. Okay, great. Seeing a lot of reactions, a lot of hands being raised. And if you raised your hand, you're not alone. About 95% of people tend to see themselves as more ethical than others, which does not make mathematical sense, right? By definition, not everyone can be above average. And this creates a blind spot. So if your internal reaction is, I'm a good person, I would never do that, that is normal. And it is also exactly why you and I need to chat about a practical decision system. So today, after discussing key considerations of the psychology of ethics, you will have what I call an ethics operating system. It is not complicated. It helps you do three things: spot ethical risk early, slow down when your brain wants to move quickly, and choose actions you can stand behind as a leader. Now, to make all of this usable, we need clear definitions. When I say ethics, I mean deciding what is right and wrong in human behavior. And also, ethics is not identical to law. In an ideal world, law should steer us toward ethical objectives, but in real life, law and ethics can conflict, and fiduciary pressures can pull decisions toward profit over responsible conduct. So being a strong leader means you can say, this might be legal, but is it responsible? Is it defensible? What is the harm profile? In professional life, ethics often means avoiding actions that could harm others, and it involves choosing behavior that can be justified to a broader community, not just to yourself or your team at work. With professional ethics, you're not just acting as you are acting as a role holder with power, information, and obligations. And that means your choices set norms for other people. And this often involves complying with ethical expectations of your profession. So, for example, as a psychologist myself, I try to comply with the ethical codes for psychologists. So that would be an example of professional ethics. Ethical behavior is what ethics looks like in action. It is the consistent pattern of choosing honesty, fairness, and accountability, even when it is inconvenient, costly, or no one is watching. It includes telling the truth in a way that does not mislead, keeping promises, protecting confidentiality, using power responsibly, treating people with dignity, and making choices you can justify to others affected by the outcome. In a leadership role, ethical behavior also means modeling expectations and shaping the environment so that doing the right thing is supported, rewarded, and safe for others to do. So now let's apply these ideas with some examples. Let's hear some examples of behavior that violates professional ethics in your field. You feel free to share them in the chat or come off mute and share your examples.
Tennis players who cheat and call the ball out, even though it's in.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? That you cut out a little bit on mine.
Yeah, I was talking about my experiences playing tennis, college tennis and pro tennis, and a lot of players, especially when there's no umpire, sometimes would cheat and call balls out even though they're in, and there's no supervisor or anyone who can hold them accountable for that, so they get away with it. And the natural reaction would be to do the same as well, and then that's when ethics come in, and your personal values as well, and what you play for, and then I guess it affects your decision moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great example. There are rules in tennis and any sport for a reason, and if you're not complying with those rules, you're not setting a great example, and you're kind of encouraging other people to sort of let those rules break down, and then then how do you keep from chaos happening and things like that? Yeah, sharing confidential information with a competitor at work, that's another great example. That could cause harm to whoever's information is confidential. It's confidential for a reason. It's usually to protect somebody. So that's going to cause harm to whoever that belongs to, and it'll likely cause harm to your organization if you're sharing it with a competitor. Or working for a competitor is similar to that. So that's, you're going to be giving your time to a competitor, and that's not going to be great for your organization. And so, these are all excellent examples, and you'll notice how in most of these examples, somebody stands to be harmed from the unethical behavior, and so that's really a key idea. There is who is going to be harmed and how. So now we will use two evidence-based models to understand what goes on in our brains in an ethical situation. The first model is a structured way to understand ethical action. This is the mode of decision-making we want to be in. Many ethics training approaches rely on REST model. So REST is the person's last name who came up with it, and it's just this idea of deliberate decision-making. And it separates ethical behavior into four components: recognizing an ethical issue, making a judgment about what is right, prioritizing ethical values enough to intend the right action, and then following through with the behavior. So in plain language, the four steps are awareness, judgment, intention, and action. And so here's what leaders tend to miss. Ethical failures often happen because one of these steps collapses early, especially awareness. It is difficult to make the right choice if you do not realize you are in an ethical decision when it matters. So let's add a simple early warning lens that is related to step one of that model: moral intensity. Moral intensity is basically how ethically loud a situation is. It is shaped by the things like the magnitude of the consequences, social consensus, probability of effect, time pressure, and proximity to those who can be affected. If you're closer to them, it's going to feel more morally intense to you. And leaders get in trouble when moral intensity feels quiet or when it's low, especially when the harm is delayed, distributed, or hidden behind a spreadsheet. In other words, it's the situation where we're in a gray area where you need to be most strategic, because in high intense situations where it's very obvious, most people tend to know how to behave appropriately in those situations. And your moral awareness is what increases your sensitivity to detecting ethical gray areas. Unfortunately, there are a few things that research has found linked to poor moral awareness, and these seem directly relevant to this audience. The first is getting socialized into the business world, such as getting a business degree. Whoops. And the second one is related to this, as it is, bottom line mentality, or the view that the main priority is profit, which is often emphasized in business environments. But this does not mean you are all doomed to have poor moral awareness. There are also several things that have been found linked to better moral awareness, such as environmental cues like signs and reminders to behave ethically and strategically placed locations, reframing decisions to consider gains instead of only losses, and participating in ethics training and education, like exactly what you are doing today. And step 2 of our deliberate model is where you form your ethical judgments. This will involve examining the ethical standards with which you need to comply and conducting a stakeholder analysis to evaluate potential harm. Stakeholder analysis is one of the simplest ways to make ethical decision-making concrete. So before you decide, pause and ask, who are all the stakeholders touched by this choice? Stakeholders are not just the people in the room or the ones with the most power. They include anyone who could be affected directly or indirectly now or later. In business context, that often includes employees, customers, clients, investors, regulators, partners, and the broader community, plus future stakeholders you will never even meet. And once you name them, then you want to identify impact. Ask yourself, who benefits? Who bears the cost? And what type of cost is it? Costs are not just financial, they can be safety, dignity, trust, opportunity, workload, mental health, reputation, or long-term career harm. So a useful final question is, if I had to explain this decision to each stakeholder group, would my reasoning still hold? If your explanation only sounds defensible to insiders or only to the people who benefit, that is usually a signal you need to slow down, gather more information, or change course. So here's a quick tool you can use. When you feel a gray area, ask, what is the likely harm? Who absorbs it? And how soon does it show up? And once you've determined the appropriate course of action and decided to follow it, all that's left is putting your plan into action. And that sounds way easier than it is. Despite having the right intent, we see people fail to put it into action when they don't believe in their ability to carry it out, or when there is not enough support from their supervisors or company leadership. So this is also a signal to you leaders and future leaders. The support you show your employees can make all the difference in ethical behavior for your team. Someone can want to behave ethically, but if you don't have the right supports in place for them to do so, they're going to be much less likely to carry it out. The second model explains why smart people can do questionable things while sincerely believing they are being reasonable. So a major idea is that moral judgments are often driven by quick intuitions and acting on impulse. And then we generate reasons afterwards. So let's see how our intuition works. Answer this puzzle quickly and note the first answer that comes to your mind. The idea is to identify what your gut is telling you the answer is. If you want, you can
Dr.
blurt out the
Chase,
answer. Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Chase, we see only agenda. It's only me, I don't know, but we see only agenda page.
Oh, you only see the agenda page?
Yeah, we don't see the whole presentation, I assume, so.
Me too.
Sorry.
Oh, let me just, so you've only seen the agenda page this whole time?
Not the whole time, but
Okay, hold on.
right now we
Let
see
me-
that. Dr. Chase, we can't hear your voice. Oops. Sorry, everyone. He will be rejoining soon. I assume that he's having some kind of technical issues. In the meantime, I hope that you're enjoying this session. Let's wait for a few seconds. Glad to hear it.
Hey, folks, sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. I got kicked out. I'm going to try to share this one more time.
Now it's visible. All is good.
There we go.
Thank you.
All right, let me back up a little bit just so you can get a sense of these slides that and I will share the slides after this so you all can review whatever you missed. So this, I guess, is where it stopped. And then a few slides that provide the definitions that we went over. And then a breakdown of the decision-making models. And then here is the second decision-making model, and here is where we left off. So apologies about that. Gotta love technology. All right, so again, this is designed to show you how your intuition works. So answer the puzzle as quickly as possible and note the first answer that comes to mind, or what does your gut tell you is the correct answer. And you can blurt it out, you can put it in the chat, whatever you prefer. All right, 10 cents. So the correct answer is 5 cents, but 10 cents is quicker and more intuitive. And in fact, research shows that most people answer this incorrectly by choosing 10 cents. And this just shows us how error prone our decision making can be when we act impulsively or act on intuition. And you know, this isn't a character flaw, it is human cognition. It's the way our brains are designed. Beyond thinking, beyond the things linked to moral awareness, you know, we discussed already, using up our brain's energy can make it more likely we will act impulsively. So under cognitive load, stress, exhaustion, or sleep deprivation, your self-control and awareness are weaker, and shortcuts become more attractive. When you're overloaded, your brain wants the path of least effort. That is cognitive economics, not a character failure, but it means leaders must design pauses intentionally into high stakes decisions. Now, I want to make this immediately practical with a quick activity. Think of a decision you made where the temptation was not, you know, do something evil, but instead make a small compromise. You know, maybe it was cutting a corner, not correcting a misunderstanding, or letting a group project slide into unfairness. And in your head, finish the sentence or write it down, actually would be even better. I told myself it was okay because blank. You know, once you have that written down, hold on to that. That sentence is gold because it reveals your rationalization style. Sorry about that. And we will come back to that later. So just want to make sure everybody gets a chance to write down their reasoning. You know, in a situation where you had to make a small compromise or cut a small corner, you told yourself it was okay because blank, fill in the blank. And we will come back to this later. And so once you act impulsively, let's add a second risk mechanism, moral disengagement. Does your rationalization we just considered align to any of these ideas here? So moral disengagement is the set of rationalizations that let you violate your own standards without feeling like the kind of person who violates standards. You reframe the action so it feels acceptable. You might call it serving a greater good. You might sanitize the language. You might compare it to worse behavior. You might displace responsibility onto an authority figure or diffuse responsibility across the group. You might minimize consequences, blame the victim, or treat affected people as less worthy of consideration. One more behavioral concept I want you to keep is moral ownership, or the idea of accountability. Moral ownership is just the mindset of I am responsible for acting when I see a moral issue. This reduces moral wiggle room and it makes it harder to look away. So great leaders will cultivate moral ownership in themselves and in their direct reports and in their teams. Great, now let's name a few forces that make ethical lapses feel reasonable and distort our impulsive decision-making. First, identity and loyalty. So one way our brains pull us off course is through commitment and consistency. Once we take a public stance, sign our name to a decision, or invest time and reputation in a certain direction, we feel internal pressure to stay consistent with our presented identity. Even when new evidence shows up and suggests we should change course or do something differently. So that pressure can quietly turn into, you know, like an escalation of commitment. We keep defending and funding a plan because we already committed, not because it is still the best or most ethical choice. And leaders can also fall into consistency talk, where they frame sticking with a decision as a strength and changing as a weakness. And even when course correction is the more responsible move. And this is related to in-group and out-group thinking. So humans are wired to sort people into us and them. And once that sorting happens, we tend to give our in-group more trust, more benefit of the doubt, and more protection. We also become more willing to bend rules for our people and more suspicious, punitive, or dismissive toward outsiders. In business settings, this can create conflicts of interest that do not feel like conflicts. You may rationalize special treatment, overlook unethical behavior, or silence concerns because the person involved is part of your team, your network, your identity group, or your leadership circle. This is one reason why nepotism is so problematic in the workplace. And both of these tendencies have deep evolutionary roots. In early human environments, consistency built trust and predictability, and group loyalty increased survival. We learned that other groups and tribes posed a threat. They were competing for the same resources. As a result, being loyal to our in-group provided survival advantages. And the problem is that modern organizations can trigger those same instincts in ways that distort our judgment. So a practical ethics strategy is to deliberately interrupt tribal autopilot. So ask yourself, if this were happening in a different team or with someone outside my circle, would I see it the same way? And ask, what evidence would justify changing my mind? When leaders normalize changing their decisions based on new information and apply the standards consistently across groups, they will reduce ethical risks and strengthen credibility. Third is social influence. So there are many different forms of this. We'll just talk through a few examples. So authority bias can make a directive feel like a moral conclusion. Social pressure can make urgency feel like justification. Conformity bias can make the group's comfort feel like evidence. And then group polarization can make decisions feel more extreme. And so throughout our evolutionary history, humans learned to compensate for our physical weaknesses by coordinating larger groups of people. You know, think about it. Successfully fighting a lion on your own seems virtually impossible, at least to me. I'm not going to try that. But with a team of hunters, your odds of survival are going to be much better. And in fact, modern organizations are examples of our need for groups. And in the context of our group living background, leadership and authority have provided many advantages. So remember, our brains have a limited amount of energy at any given time. So we evolved various strategies to conserve that energy. And when people in power tell us something, it gives our brains a shortcut to the answer. You know, they did the thinking, so we don't have to, is the idea. As a result, we will often follow what authority figures tell us without thinking twice. You know, you can think of the famous Stanley Milgram experiments when you think about this. And relatedly, we evolved to look to others in similar situations for guidance. You know, this is very beneficial for emergency situations such as running from a threat or that lion that's hiding in the bushes. It is not beneficial for critical thinking and unbiased decision making. So in ethical dilemmas, following the crowd could lead you into big problems. So have you ever, given the wrong answer just to fit in? Back in the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch set out to answer a simple but powerful question. Would people go along with something they knew was wrong just to fit in with a group. And to find out, Ash brought participants into a room for what they were told was a vision test. They were shown a line on one card and asked to match it with one of 3 lines on another card. The correct answer was very, very obvious, like painfully obvious. But here's the catch. Everyone else in the room was in on it. They were actors told to give the wrong answer on purpose. And the real participant, they answered after hearing everyone else go with a clearly wrong line. And what do you think happened? Well, over a third of participants conformed and gave the wrong answer just because everyone else did. They knew it was wrong, but they didn't want to stand out. And when asked why, some participants admitted that they did not want to rock the boat, and others thought maybe the group knew something they didn't. They thought maybe their eyes were deceiving them. Either way, they conformed. And so what does this prove? This proves that even when the truth is obvious, social pressure is powerful. We're wired to seek belonging, and sometimes that means going along with the crowd, even when our gut says otherwise. And in fact, other research has shown that the power to conform and follow the herd is even more powerful when the correct answer isn't obvious. In other words, when there is uncertainty, our natural instinct is to look to what other people are doing. And based on my experience, uncertainty is way more common in ethical situations. And Ash's work is classic in psychology because it highlights a fundamental truth about human behavior. Group dynamics influence us more than we realize. And understanding what can help us build stronger, more ethical teams. So when you do that, people will feel safe to speak up, even when they're the lone voice of truth. And so next is perception and reasoning. So an example of this is confirmation bias. And this is another quiet driver of ethical mistakes because it shapes what we notice and what we ignore. And we all do this even if we don't realize it. I catch myself doing it all the time. I catch my wife doing it. Everybody does it. And once we form an initial belief, interpretation, or plan, our minds naturally search for information that supports it, and we discount it. We discount, minimize, or explain away information that threatens it. So we just kind of get this selective attention, even if we're not realizing it's going on. And we also ask leading questions, and we prefer sources that agree with us, and remember confirming details more clearly than contradictory ones. This is a subconscious mechanism that distorts things more than you realize. And in real business decisions, confirmation bias shows up as cherry picking metrics or overweighting one favorable story or treating concerns as negativity instead of data. It becomes especially risky when a decision is tied to that identity or status, because disconfirming evidence can feel like a personal attack in those situations rather than helpful feedback. And so a simple way to interrupt confirmation bias is to build disconfirmation into your process. So for example, you could ask, what would prove me wrong? What evidence would change my recommendation? Invite somebody to argue the opposite case, or assign a rotating devil's advocate role, which is where, basically it's that person's job to argue with everything. And if you normalize curiosity and dissent or disagreement, you protect decision quality and reduce the chance that confidence becomes a substitute for truth. All right, so now let's put this into practice. Take a couple minutes to read this scenario. Then share in the chat the top 1 or 2 most relevant biases that you should be cautious of in this scenario? Start now. So once you get a sense of the scenario, share in the chat the top 1 or 2 most relevant biases that you should be cautious of in this scenario. Excellent. You know, sunk cost fallacy is a version of the confirmation bias, and herd mentality is another way to put that, those social pressure biases that we talked about. Yep, confirmation bias again. Yeah, excellent. You are definitely picking it up. So, you know, of course, it's important to take steps to, you know, mitigate confirmation bias here, because this project or this product was your baby. You know, you're going to be inclined to dismiss contradictory evidence. So that's definitely a key one here. There's definitely some pressure from leadership, so authority bias is at play here. There's also social pressure, and you know, you can call it herd mentality. There are many different names for these sorts of things, but in this situation, many folks in your group are encouraging you to ignore the warning signs. So you all are doing excellent. Now let's connect ethics to personality. You know, I work at Hogan Assessments, and our main focus is personality. So I thought I'd share some insights from some of that work. And this is where, you know, leadership can become very real, and you can use personality to support your leadership. So in personality-based findings, certain stable individual differences are linked to higher ratings of ethical behavior. So for example, being calmer and more emotionally stable and being conscientious and rule respecting are all associated with higher ratings of performing ethical behavior in the workplace. You know, calm people can handle stress better and avoid cognitive depletion. Introverted folks are less concerned with social pressures. Friendly people care about the well-being of others, and people who are rule compliant will be more likely to follow ethical standards. So here's the key point though. Personality is not destiny. It's a pattern of tendencies that shows up more strongly in certain conditions. And ethical dilemmas are often those weak or low intensity situations where rules are unclear, time is short, and accountability is blurry. And that is exactly when these tendencies can become outcomes. You know, again, in situations where the correct action is obvious, most people, regardless of your personality, will do the right thing. But when it becomes a gray area is when your tendencies kind of take over. So how do leaders use this information responsibly? So one way you can use this is the idea that personality can strengthen selection and hiring by identifying candidates who are more likely to stay steady under stress, follow through on commitments, and respect rules and boundaries. You're not trying to predict perfection. You are reducing risk by choosing people whose tendencies align with ethical job demands. So that's one way. You can you can use it to select leaders. The leaders can also use it to select their team to help make sure that people are going to be more likely to perform ethically. Another way, personality helps you anticipate blind spots and increase your self-awareness. So the point is not, labeling someone as good or bad. The point is more forecasting where guardrails, coaching, and accountability need to be stronger. It helps you be strategic about different tools you need to put into your system to help you given your unique personality. And when you develop as leaders, personality is useful because it gives you a language for patterns to communicate with. So you can coach behavior change and design environments that reduce ethical risk. All right, so let's land this all in a tool you can use immediately. I'm going to give you a 5-step operating system. And I want you to imagine using it in a real meeting when you feel that subtle pressure to compromise. So step 1, name the moment. Say to yourself, this is an ethical decision, not just a business decision. That prevents ethical fading. Step 2, turn up the volume using stakeholder analysis. Ask yourself, what is the harm? Who carries it? How soon? And how likely? Step 3 is identify the pressure and the biases. Ask yourself, what is pushing me toward speed or convenience right now? Fatigue, incentives, loyalty, fear, reputation, politics. Then ask, which bias is most likely here? Is it authority bias, conformity, social pressure, confirmatory bias, and you want to identify the bias so you can develop strategies around it. Step 4, challenge your story or challenge your decision or your interpretation. This is where you separate belief from evidence. Prior belief can bias judgments, and strong leaders regulate that pool. So ask yourself, if someone disagreed with me, what would they say is missing from my reasoning? And this is going to help.
I can't now. I am on webinar.
All right. That was great.
Sorry.
No problem. I enjoyed that. A little startling, but so ask yourself, if someone disagreed with me, what would they say? And this is going to help you fight against that confirmation bias. And then finally, step 5, choose an action you can defend publicly, not because you plan to be exposed, but because it forces clarity. This is moral ownership. I am responsible for acting when I see a moral issue. And then ask yourself, could I explain this decision to stakeholders I respect, including people who would be harmed by it? That is the system. It is simple, but it is not easy. It works because it anticipates human psychology, not because it assumes perfect virtue. So let's do a final 1-minute reflection. Go back to the sentence you completed earlier. I told myself it was okay because blank. Now add one more sentence. Next time, I will slow down by asking blank. choose one of the operating system questions, maybe your favorite, and make it your default. I'll give you 30 seconds to write it down, and then we'll move on to the last piece. Okay, great. Hopefully you got a chance to write down your favorite pause question. Yeah, I love that one. Who could be negatively impacted if I move forward anyway? That is a key consideration. Who is going to be negatively impacted? And so as we close, here is the leadership frame I want you to remember. Ethical failures rarely start with villains. They start with speed, pressure, and stress, plus authority and group forces that make the compromise feel normal. Great leaders do not wait for a crisis to become ethical. They build habits and environments that make ethical action more likely, even when incentives and emotions push the other way. So if you take one thing from today, take this. Integrity is not a slogan. It is a decision process you practice under real constraints. So thank you all for your engagement and participation today. If you want, we can use the remaining time for any questions you have.
Dr. Chase, I can't thank you enough for this amazing webinar session, for your insights on ethical decision making. Right now, I feel more confident to move forward with my colleagues and even with my friends to make more ethical based decisions in real life and at work as well. Hope everyone feels same. If anyone has any questions, feel free to write in a chat or ask directly. We will be more than happy to answer those questions. Thank you, everyone. Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Christina?
I have a question. So like, how do you deal with like, or addressing unethical behavior in a workplace where like a society, country, or values hierarchy in a way? Because sometimes some people might think it come off as rude, or you're a bit too forward, even though like I guess it's like a mix of authority bias, but as well as just that's the society that the people go by. So
Yeah, that is an excellent question, and that's exactly why I'm trying to appeal to you all as future leaders to design environments to where your employees do not feel that pressure. But the reality is, a lot of us are in those environments where we feel those pressures, and it's a very different thing when you're not in the leadership position to navigate that. And so really the right thing to do is always to speak up. But I say that knowing that there are organizations, there are leaders who, if you do that, they could retaliate against you. And so only you are going to really know your given situation and know the smartest decision for you in that situation. And so it's going to the extent you can speak up in a more diplomatic way to help navigate it, or consult other leaders, maybe your leader's leader, the more that you can use your resources and communicate in a very professional and diplomatic way, you should be safe. But again, I don't know your leader, I don't know your organization, and there are people out there that just are going to respond negatively, and so you have to protect yourself, and you have to be careful. And unfortunately, when you're not in those leadership positions, you don't have as much influence on changing that environment. But and this is also a very interesting idea, but I believe if you always stand up for what you believe is right, sure, you might find your way outside of that organization, but eventually you're going to find the people that care about you for you, and find somewhere where you fit in more. That's a very scary approach, and it really kind of honestly, it depends. It's easy for me, someone with privilege in America, to say something like that, but not everybody has the type of privilege to be able to always do what they believe is right and just kind of wait to see what happens. So it's really kind of comes down to your unique situation, protecting yourself and trying to find a way to do what is right.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions? Yes. Hyan, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, please go ahead.
Yes, hi. I put this question in the chat, but I don't know if you guys see it. My problem is I manage a team in the creative department of an agency. So the nature of the creatives are always very hard to manage because they need the freedom, and sometimes they even feel the need to be a little bit naughty and wrong, and they hate rules and regulations, and they would react quite harsh if I kind of try to push ethics upon them. So how do I create an environment? Sorry, that's my cat. How do I create an environment that's balanced in both ethics and freedom? And how should I deal when someone in the creative team does something unethical?
Great question. So I definitely agree with you. In creative situations where innovation is important, conflict is a key piece of that, and so is your intellectual freedom. And so you have to balance that line in this situation. I think one of the most important things in these situations, because you want to encourage disagreement, you want to encourage conflict, or healthy conflict, you want to encourage people to speak up, especially in innovative situations, because somebody might have a better idea, and so it's more about kind of laying ground rules up front, letting people know it's okay to disagree, it's okay to have those arguments, as long as we're treating each other respectfully, and we're not ridiculing each other because we disagree, we're not humiliating each other, we're treating each other respectfully. And so that's going to be the key piece to keep a psychologically safe environment, especially when disagreements and things like that should be encouraged. And so and if you try to push, just ethics in general, let's say the ideas that they're coming up with could be considered unethical, you can kind of reframe it as more of the in that debate context. They're coming up with an idea, but maybe you pose an alternative idea that would be a little bit more ethical. And so it's kind of more about, it's not unethical to have an idea that would be unethical if you were to do it. And so, it's okay if they are having these ideas, but you also kind of need to be strategic to guide the discussion, to be like, okay, that's a good idea, but that could cause harm over here. What about this other idea that's a little bit more ethical? And so just kind of framing it in sort of the approach that they have, or the discussions that they are already having, in a way that would be more acceptable to them.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of
Like
course.
laying down like the ground rule is something I've never tried before. So thanks.
Yeah, of course.
All right, everyone, thank you so much, Dr. Chase, for such interesting webinar and insightful webinar as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this webinar. Hope all of us learned a lot out of it. So I will say goodbye to you for now. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you again, Dr. Chase. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you all for having